Uh, as far as today's talk, Cheryl Roberts is the Executive Director of the Greenburger Center for Social and Criminal Justice, a nonprofit that she founded with Francis Greenburger in 2014 to advocate for the decriminalization of people living with serious mental illness. She serves as Corporation Counsel for the City of Hudson, the first woman appointed to that role, and is a licensed bond agent providing pro bono bond agent services. She's a former town judge from environmental and land use law and served as counsel to committees in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. She was a recent candidate for the state Supreme Court, and in this talk we'll discuss her experience, the process and politics involved with the selection of Supreme Court justices. So Cheryl, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Fred. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the interest in this topic. And I know the process is that people ask questions at the end, but I'm going to ask your indulgence to, maybe Fred, you can address. I'm very curious to know why your members are interested in the Supreme Court race. You know, Supreme Court races typically don't get a lot of attention, and we'll talk about why. And people don't really pay attention to them. And there's not a Supreme Court justice up this year. So I'm fascinated to know why members wanted to hear about this race, was it? Or was it just generally how a Supreme Court justice is elected?
I could only imagine that at this time of year. And in my thinking, I mean, the United States Supreme Court sometimes changes history. And I wouldn't denigrate it by saying it's only the New York State Supreme Court, but I imagine that there's a lot of riding on their decisions. And that's my opinion as to why I'm interested. I'm guessing as to everybody else, but a lot of people do like the Sunday programs as well.
Well, thanks. And it's actually a great jumping off point because I wanted to start with the Supreme Court and give a little bit of background about where this court fits in the process. So many people have the understanding, as it sounds like you do, that the Supreme Court is the highest court in New York State. It is not. It's poorly named. The Supreme Court on the state level is actually the trial level, the lowest level court. Though they do have the widest jurisdiction and they affect people's lives more than most any court. So it's the Supreme Court, then the appellate division is the intermediate court, and the Court of Appeals is the New York State's highest court. So the Supreme Court handles things like divorce and separation, annulments. They handle mortgage foreclosures, injunctions. They have some jurisdiction over criminal matters. Well, they can handle any felony higher level criminal matter, but it's downstate. They will handle criminal matters as well. I think importantly, and a big part of their docket is also what's called Article 78 proceedings. And they are administrative proceedings whereby people are challenging government decisions. And so you can think of it as, I think the most common example is maybe a community group, a citizen group that are challenging maybe a land use decision or a zoning board decision. So they really have an impact on people's everyday lives. There are, I want to say, 380 Supreme Court justices in the state of New York. The state is divided into, I believe now it's 13 judicial districts, and Supreme Court justices are elected within a district. So the Albany district, we are in the 3rd judicial district. There are 7 counties. It's Albany, Rensselaer, Schoharie, Greene, Columbia, and Sullivan, and Ulster County. So within those districts, the process is very political. New York is one of just a few states, 7, maybe 8, that enact or that elect their Supreme Court justices or tri-level justices by this hybrid process that involves judicial delegates. This process was challenged about 10 years ago in the US Supreme Court, actually. And Justice Kennedy actually said it was upheld, but he said that this law really ought to be changed. And he said that the Constitution does not prohibit legislatures from enacting stupid laws. And that was a quote he took from Justice Thurgood Marshall from another matter, but the same applied here. So I want to talk a little bit about the process, and then we're going to talk about why it's, I guess you could say stupid, why I found it incredibly unfair, I think, and very political, which is exactly the opposite of what I think we all want for our judges. So, the process is Supreme Court justices are nominated basically by judicial delegates. Every county gets a number of delegates based on their population. And they go to a judicial convention and they nominate a person, and that person's name appears on the ballot. And because the politics are so heavily Democratic in the 3rd Judicial District, it wasn't always that way in the 3rd Judicial District. It used to be that Democrats and Republicans were more, the population was more balanced. And so in the past, at least in some counties, judges were selected essentially by bipartisan, cross endorsements. The 3rd Judicial District has really changed. And a few years ago, because the delegates are chosen by population, Albany really has the most population of the 7 counties, and they could always, in a sense, control who those judges were, because they send the most delegates to the convention, and whoever they were basically told to vote for would get the nomination. So about 10 or so years ago, the chairman got together and decided, the 7 chairmen of the counties in the 3rd Judicial District decided that they would have this quote unquote deal where the judges would be divided up. So Albany got 7 to choose from of the, I think 15 or whatever it was. Rensselaer, I believe, got 3, Ulster got 3, Schoharie got none, and Columbia Greene got to share 1. And the notion was that when your judge, your judge came up, your county party bosses essentially got to pick who that person was. And then the party bosses would tell the judicial delegates, you vote for Joe. And then the other counties would agree not to oppose Joe because it was Albany's turn, or it was Rensselaer County's turn. So for better or worse, that process was working, or I don't know, I hate to say working, but it was functioning as it was intended to function. And then in 2014, there was a huge fight in Albany. And the fight was between a judge, she's now a judge, Peggy Walsh, and Justin Corcoran. They both are now judges. At that time, Justin was not, and Peggy was Judge Walsh was not, and was a family court judge, and Judge Corcoran was not a judge at that time. The long story short, and I don't pretend to know all the politics, the delegation ended up picking Justin Corcoran to run. And there were many women who were very angry because in the 3rd Judicial District, right now there are, now 19 judges. All of them are white men except for 3. There are 3 women. There's 1 person of color, and she's also one of the women. So back in 2014, there was already a push for women, from women saying, this is unbalanced, this is not fair, this is really cronyism. You keep picking the same kinds of people. So we want this highly qualified woman. And again, I don't know all the politics, but it came out that Mr. Corcoran was the nominee. He ended up losing that race, which is almost, unheard of for a Democrat to lose in this judicial district. A Republican woman named Lisa, oh my goodness, Lisa, I'll think of it. So Mr. Corcoran went back to being a clerk. So fast forward to 2019. It was Columbia County's turn because their judge, or Columbia Green, their judge was retiring. And so I was approached to see if I would want to run. And I will say in Columbia County's defense, when I was approached, it was very clear that our chairman, Keith Kanega, was not going to just choose me and say, we all have to vote for Cheryl. He put it in the paper. He said, there's an opening. Does anyone want to apply? He sent emails. He was very public about that there was this opening. And he also reached out to Greene County. We wanted to know who was interested because this position was opening up. I had to, once I decided to run, I had to go before the committee and they had to select me. It wasn't an inside deal, which I'm very proud that Columbia County does it that way. And in fact, all their judicial delegates were women in 2019. So I was approached to run and I had to think long and hard about it. And I'm going to digress for just a moment and tell you why it was such a difficult decision for me to run for the Supreme Court. I had wanted to run in 2012. And I approached my committee chairman at that time, and she said, no, we already have a person. It turned out to be a man named Richard Mott, who eventually he won, because that's the way, the process worked. So they said, but we need you in 2012 to run for the assembly. We really need you to step up and run for your party for the assembly. And they said, we have no one else. And the assembly race encompassed a district involving Rensselaer County, a little bit of Washington, and Albany. So I said, I'm interested in politics and I'll run. So I ran, and almost the moment I got involved, the party turns out in Rensselaer County had a candidate they wanted to run to, a man named Keith Hammond. And so I had to have a primary because even though I got the endorsement from the counties, Mr. Hammond primaried me. And it was a very bruising primary. I won't get into all the details. You probably can Google some of it. But the long story short is I won the primary. I was a very strong candidate. So the Democratic Assembly Campaign Committee, or DAC, came into my race. When DAC supports a candidate, they do so at different levels. I was considered an A race, and so they put a lot of money into my race. I was very proud to represent the people of 107th in this as a candidate. But when DAC got into my race, they wanted me to run negative ads and to do robocalls, two things that I didn't want to do. So I resisted the negative ads until at one point they said, well, look, Steve McLaughlin, who was my opponent, is taking credit for this piece of legislation, and he voted against it. So I thought, well, that's not right. You shouldn't be taking credit if you voted against it. So I let this negative campaign ad go out. It turns out Mr. McLaughlin didn't vote for the bill. He wasn't even in the assembly when he passed, though he was taking credit for it. But I was reported to the Campaign Ethics Committee, a nonprofit church group, for lying. And the long story short is I wasn't told that I was even reported. My campaign kept it from me until the night before the hearing on this event. And it turned out that the speaker's website and the Assembly Campaign Committee had made a mistake. So this wasn't even something I knew about or had a fault in. It was the speaker's mistake, but I said the night before the hearing, I wanted to go to the hearing and explain the situation. Well, I was told I couldn't. I wouldn't be allowed to. I had to protect the speaker, and if I went, there would be consequences, and they would be not supporting me in my race. And at that point, they put in $160,000 in the campaign. And those bills were outstanding. Actually, they put in much more, but those bills were outstanding. And as a single mom, I couldn't pay that money. I also was told and advised, I think correctly, that if I pulled out of the race now, people would assume that I had done this unethical thing. So I stayed in the race, and I ended up losing by just a couple thousand votes. But the point of that whole digression is that I wanted to be very sure before I got into another race that I was the only candidate, that my party would be behind me, that there would be no primary, and that this would be a clean race where there was support, there was, you know, like I say, the support behind this candidacy. I took a lot of time and was assured that there was no other candidate, and that it was Columbia County's turn. So I decided to let my boss know, Francis Greenburger, that I would be running for this race, and I jumped in. A few months later, I was told, well, nope. Even the day I announced my candidacy, I was told, nope, we're going to now run Justin Corcoran again, the person who had lost in 2012. So, you know, the process was, in our sense, in Columbia County sense, thwarted. We were supposed to have this orderly progression, and all of a sudden, Albany was jumping in and saying, no, 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 you don't get your pick because this woman, Lisa Fisher, the judge who won from Green, that's your judge. So you don't get, we're going to take the judge spot this year for us, even though it was Albany's seat that they lost in 2014. So probably if I was, I don't know, if I was more behaved, I would have just stepped down and let that process go. But I really couldn't. I just felt like this is not fair. This is, you're running another white man, and no offense to the white men, but we cannot have a judiciary that does not reflect the people that they sit in judgment of. We need that reflects the population that it serves, and the 3rd Judicial District does not. Today we have 19 judges, and it's still only 3 are women and only 1 is of color. And so I pretty much knew I wasn't going to be able to overcome this political machine, but I stayed in because I felt like this had to be discussed. It had to be exposed. And so I stayed on until the Judicial Convention, when it became clear that the party bosses had really rallied the troops, and they were not going to support me, even though I had backing from Labor and from Dan McCoy and from Kathy Sheehan and from women's groups and many other people. The powers that be were intent on letting Justin Corcoran run again. And so he did, and he ended up winning. He's now a judge, and I have been given the commitment from some of the party bosses that I can run again in 2023. I have no idea whether I'm going to do that or not at this point. But what I really wanted from this process was not so much a deal, but I wanted the process to change. I really do think that we need to elect judges in a different way. At the very least, if New York's going to have this system, and not every state does, there are states that elect from a general election. There are states that appoint. But if we're going to have this hybrid process where a very few people, basically 70 people, get to pick the Supreme Court judges that sit in judgment of hundreds of thousands of people. If we're going to have that process continue, we need to do something at least like Columbia County have an open process. And we need to also, candidates and the public, their supporters, need to be prepared to primary delegates. There is a way that I could have gotten my delegates to vote for me at the convention if I had primaried the delegates, but it's extraordinarily difficult because you'd have to get 70 people to primary the party boss's delegates. And you know, I think in the future, perhaps maybe if the public becomes more knowledgeable about this kind of race, what's at stake, and that they can actually have a say, that they can help the candidate, you know, carry petitions for a challenge to the delegates. They could support an alternative, you know, delegate. Maybe things will change if there's really a threat, but it has to come from the people, I think. But I think it's a fight worth fighting. I felt like, you know, I couldn't stand down. My kids and my bank account, and, you know, probably, would have felt differently, did feel differently, but I do think that it was an important thing to do, and I'm really so fascinated and honored and glad that you all want to hear about this race, because there's not a Supreme Court justice up this year. There will be next year in the 3rd Judicial District. It's Ulster County's turn. You know, who's to say that someone from Columbia County couldn't challenge that or run if they had the support, if people were willing to run those alternative delegates. So I hope that you all will, you know, kind of think about all this, and next time in 2021, when a justice spot comes up, that you'll engage and pay attention and put some pressure on your party boss to do the right thing, to have a more diverse bench and a more open process. So I think I'll stop and see if anyone has questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions that have come in via the chat. The first one was my question, and it relates to how judges are chosen, or what are there any qualifications to be a Supreme Court judge in New York?
You have to be 10 years on the bench, I think 10 years. And you know, there used to be a judicial vetting organization. There is not any longer, but you have to be in good standing, you know, at the bar.
Mm-hmm. So you do need to be you do have to have a law license.
Oh yeah, so the only judges in the state of New York that don't have to have a law license are the town and village judges.
Okay. So we have a comment from Sherry, not so much as a question, but pointing out about, wouldn't it be interesting if running for president required a type of picking? Would you know who have been on the ballot, I wonder? I think she's referring to our current president. And then I have another question from Frank Robinson. What was so hot about Corcoran?
Corcoran.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. You know, I don't know. I think he was very well liked in his county. I don't know why he was given a second chance to run.
Okay. Fred had a question. He said he may have missed it, but how are the people who do the picking for court nominees get their position?
The delegates, do you mean, Fred? Yeah. So that's a function of the party, the chairman of the Democratic Party and the chairman of the Republican Party. They, you know, basically choose the delegates. The delegates actually, I mean, that's how it really works. I mean, the truth is the delegates get put on the ballot. You all vote for them. You probably don't even realize what you're doing. But, you know, the delegates are put on, it must be the primary ballots. I have to go back and that.
So technically the delegates are elected.
Yeah.
But it's such a process that nothing is really obvious to anybody.
Right, and they're not, and so the delegates aren't primary. I mean, you could primary, you could have an alternative delegate, and there could actually be a race for the delegate spot, but there never is. And so it's basically, just like the Supreme Court judge, you don't know that you even had a choice, and you really didn't. Right. You're getting to pick. You're getting to pick. Vote for the person that the delegates told you basically is the qualified one, is the one you should vote for. And like I say, most times that ends up being the Democratic nominee.
So, but then my question I would have is, any party can put forward a delegate, nominee, a candidate for a Supreme Court judge position. And does that happen frequently, or is it usually parties say, well, this is your county, and that's your county? Right.
Well, it happened in order, like I, said, 10 years ago or whenever it was, this deal was made, and it was, Columbia County's turn in 2019, according to the agreement that the party bosses worked out. Okay,
but would that be the Democratic Party bosses, or is it the agreement between the parties?
No, it was just Democrats, because the population is such and the enrollment is such that the Republicans are outnumbered. Now, the Republicans put someone forth as well. Last time they had a very qualified woman named Linda Blum Johnson who ran in 2019. There were 3 seats open. So the Republicans put up 1 candidate. The 2 other incumbents won easily, the Democratic incumbents, and then really the race seemed to boil down to, Corcoran versus Blum John. Hyphenated name.
Okay, I don't see any other questions or hands raised. Does anybody, if anybody else has any questions for Cheryl, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
I had a question. I know you explained the level at which the Supreme Court functions. Is there any understanding or view that the decisions made by the Supreme Court justices reflect the party's politics that selects them?
Yeah, there was certainly, there have been allegations or concerns that the delegates happen to be sometimes law partners, former law partners, or in the same area of law. So, for instance, Mr. Corcoran had worked in, medical malpractice, and several of the delegates, were in law firms that had done the same kind of work. So there are also delegates who themselves want to be judges in the future, and so they get selected, and the chairman knows that, that person may very well vote the way the chairman wants if that person wants to eventually be a judge themselves. Huh. There are any number of ways that people who become delegates can be co-opted or can be self-interested. Having said that, I know the delegates from Columbia County, and they were all amazingly dedicated citizens who were taking this whole thing very seriously. I know other delegates in other counties who were the same, who were open-minded, who pushed back. So there certainly are those types of delegates too, but there are some delegates who are, unfortunately, the perception could be that they are maybe not as unbiased or thinking independently as you might like.
Thank you.
I have a question from Frank Robinson. This is Frank's great for asking good questions, and this is how could this system actually be reformed?
Yeah, blow it up. I think I think the system. I think we need to have a change to the Constitution to how we elect judges. I'm not sure I know exactly a better solution, but it's not this one. Pennsylvania has a general election from what I understand, and then if the judge does a good job and is evaluated, then they are appointed for life. Others, are elected, like in the county courts. The county courts, they're very important positions, and they are elected at the general election by the people in the county. And not surprisingly, women win. When the process is open and fair, women actually win. People statistically tend to trust women as judges more than men if you poll them. Some of the Supreme Court justices there are acting Supreme Court justices who are actually county court judges who are women, and then they get to handle some Supreme Court matters as an acting Supreme Court judge. And so if you add them, there's some more diversity. But if you look at the Supreme Court judges who are elected through the Supreme Court process, like I said, very few women.
Okay, well, that whole concept plays well into, you can explain more about that. Charles Hindler asked, is there much bitterness among Columbia County Democrat women about your history in running for Supreme Court judge position?
Well, funny you should say that. We have just formed the Columbia County Women's Alliance, and it is a group of women who came together really after this election. We had lunch together, and they just said, this has to stop. And so we formed this alliance. It's women and organizations, heads of organizations that have come together. We are not incorporated. We are just an alliance, and we are going to take a very hard look at the Supreme Court races from now on. We are actually doing our first event tomorrow night. We're going to be having a forum. The Lieutenant Governor, Senator Gillibrand, will be giving the opening, the welcome. So we're very proud about that. And we'll be featuring 3 women who are running for the Assembly. We will also look at social issues. So it's not just the judge race, although that is definitely part of the impetus for why we formed. We'll be looking at getting more women elected, putting more women in positions of power, and looking at social justice issues. So that's what Columbia County has done, and I think the chairman is committed to, also our Democratic chairman, keeping all women for right now and people of color on the judicial delegates who are specifically not beholden to anyone. So I think in the interim that's the way to go, and I was hoping that the counties and other counties would also implement in their county committee rules that the delegates have to be appointed in an open process, that they can't be just appointed by the chairman. I think that would be a big help too. And that the judicial candidate themselves would also have to be vetted by the whole committee. So it's not just one person picking the delegates and essentially picking the judge.
Okay. Olga Porterfield asked about what is your opinion about elections versus appointing judges?
I think that, like the county level, I think that judges should be elected by the general population. Everybody who the judge will sit in judgment of. For the higher courts, I do believe there should be some kind of vetting process, and they should be appointed. I do think probably the governor, for example, should appoint like he does, or hopefully someday she will, the judges at the Court of Appeals. I think there's a combination.
Okay. And Andrew asked, judging should be straightforward for competent judging, assuming they are not corrupt or incompetent. Can you cite some examples of bias in Supreme Court rulings?
Well, I think there's certainly a case that I was involved with I was litigating it, and I felt like there was a lot of bias in that case with the judge. I probably don't want to go there at the moment.
Okay,
but,
well, to follow up on that, just explore, you raised the example a little bit earlier of delegate people that are nominated, appointed to positions, or whatever the process is where the delegates choose who's going to be the judge, is that the delegates may all come from a certain law firm or an area of certain practice. When those judges in cases become before a judge from that area of practice, does there ever appear to be a bias?
I can't answer that. I can't. I'm just.
Okay.
This was these were issues that were brought up during the campaign. That how could it be that all these delegates practice the same kind of law as this judge or that judge? It's. I think and whether or not I can point to a specific area or specific case, specific instance of bias, judges have to be held to a higher standard. It's not just was there actually. It's is there a perception? Is there are we? Yeah, we need to hold judges to a higher standard, and there's no reason why we need to even have this question coming up if they're elected by the general population. I think we have to do better, and we can.
Okay, Fred has a question. Once a judge is elected, are they able to run again when their term is up, or are they subject to the same selection process? So
the Supreme Court judge is a 14-year term. And so it's a long time. And when they age out at 70, their seat opens up. They can stay on through a weird process until they're 76, if they are certificated, it's called. In terms of when the seat opens up, like in 2019, there were 2 incumbents whose 14-year terms ended. I suppose that somebody could have challenged them. But that didn't happen.
Okay, we have a lull in questions again. If anyone else has a question for Cheryl, you type it into the chat or unmute and ask. Fred, you were starting to say.
In the example you just cited, though, if someone is young enough and their 14-year term is up, can they, at their own discretion, say, I'm running again for this same seat? Or do they have to go please the party bosses to get selected to run? As an incumbent, are they entitled to just say, I am running and that's it?
No, I don't think they're entitled. And that's what happened in Albany. So the 2 incumbents, and I think that, I'm sure that they went to their party bosses and said, I want to run again. And the party boss said, yes or no, or.
Okay, so they're still subject to a similar process.
Yeah, and I don't, usually if you're an incumbent and you're doing well, I think you just assume that if you want to run again, you'll run again and you won't be opposed.
Interesting.
It's more than you wanted to know about judging, huh?
Yeah, well, it's all good. It's all good to learn about how the system works. Any other questions from anyone?
Judy does.
I have one. How is a normal citizen supposed to evaluate judges on a ballot, say, between a Republican and a Democrat candidate?
It's a good question. I think reading about them and they really don't debate, so that's difficult. They go to events, but very often when when they're on the campaign trail, they say very general things, and that's probably appropriate. They shouldn't be necessarily talking about how they would rule on one thing or another. I think they have, last time they had Facebook pages, you could check out those and see what they're saying. And then I would say, take a look at who's supporting them. What are the groups that are endorsing them? I was very proud to have a cross section of people. I had former judges who were supporting me, labor unions, women's groups, individuals who elected officials who supported me. So I had a real cross section of people who basically vouched for me, and I think that says a lot, about someone.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a question for Cheryl?
I do.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. Going back to the re-election, if a judge wants to be re-elected after the 14 years, wouldn't they try not to go against wishes of the bosses? if they needed their approval to go for re-election?
You know, it's a logical conclusion, I think. I would hate to say that, you know, once you're elected, it's a long term, so who knows who the party boss is, you know, when you're, and I think, yeah, I understand.
Trust them.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, but I think, yeah, a lot of the judges, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I'm not in their heads. I don't know. I really probably.
Well, the way they're elected kind of makes it look like they would try to keep in line with whoever the bosses would be, because there seems to be a general line that they like to follow.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I guess I'd hope and think that 14 years is a long time. So, and things change and that they once they get the job, that they do the right thing. Does it always happen? I'm sure not. And like I said, I had movies where I really feel like can I prove it? No, you can't. But I feel like the decision that was made in one of the cases I'm thinking of was really about things other than the law. But I hope and I really hope that for the most part that doesn't happen.
I hope so. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So anyone else have a question for Cheryl? So it sounds like you've amazed us all, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do, like I said, know that I'm very inspired that you all are taking a Sunday afternoon when it's sunny out to listen to all of this and to be interested and informed about a judicial race, because I wish more people did. And if more people were engaged, I think maybe the system could change. So thank you so much for the time. And the
Well, thank you again for presenting today. And I echo what you say. It's important to know how the system works. That, you know, the Supreme Court in New York is the first line often of people's exposure to legal system.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I will.
Thank you.